So my goal today is to convince you that you actually can be quite secure in the cyberspace, provided that you take the right actions and plan it. In order to be successful, you first of all have to assign adequate resources, both in terms of people and money and technology, in order to cover the entirety of your network. You also have to integrate your security plans and processes into the business writ large. Security cannot be something you tack on after the fact. It needs to be built in. Management has to esteem the value of security. Same thing. It's not an after the fact thing. We should buy some of this, 2 pounds of security. It actually is important to make that a key business product. On top of that, you have to have agility. You have to have enough resources to respond to emergencies when they happen, because it will happen, and there needs to be enough surplus people and time and money to actually do something. I've called this sort of the equivalent of the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You know how people need security, they need food, they need esteem. The same thing is true of security. Anyway, enough about that. We'll get down to nuts and bolts. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are the 3 key issues that you have to understand to talk about security. If you think about the OPM hack, since it's in the news, quite clearly, there no longer is any confidentiality for the data stored by OPM. Someone else has it, at least one other party. There's no telling how many people might have acquired that data before the hack was discovered, right? Just because you know about one doesn't mean there weren't others. Integrity refers to whether the data is unchanged. If I were a foreign intelligence service, I might want to put people in the database so they could say, oh yeah, I have OPM clearances, when they apply for a job in the Pentagon or somewhere. So being able to know that your data actually is what you put in and has not been changed is a critical value. And finally, availability. If you don't trust the data, do you want to make it available? Do you want other people to rely on it? That's availability. They make the triangle. It's called the CIA triangle. It wasn't otherwise inspired. It just happens to be that way. But you really have to think about those factors. 0 days are a type of attack for which no patch exists. In other words, a patch has existed for 0 days. Recently, the Italian company hacking team was hacked, and several 0 days were released. These were essentially vulnerabilities in the computer system that were well known to hacking team, but not to Microsoft in most of these cases, but also several other vendors. Microsoft actually released a out-of-schedule patch for this vulnerability because in the process of getting hacked, hacking team lost control. They lost the confidentiality of their data, and hence it became widely available. It was no longer only available to hacking team as was their intent. So there have been some new patches to deal with this. In reality, even though the 0 days are the big scary monsters, they're quite rare. I don't expect you to read this slide, though it's actually an excellent slide, and I'm going to summarize it. But I do want to throw in a pitch for the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, the DBIR. It comes out once a year. It's been coming out since 2008, I believe. and they're always worth reading because they have a lot of high-level data. And that high-level data, I believe, is key to understanding how you get the most bang for the buck in securing your data. So here's the summary. Almost all the attacks are, I wrote low-hanging fruit. They're not 0 days. This past issue of the DBIR, 99.9% of all the intrusions that Verizon and their partners saw were not 0 days. They were vulnerabilities for which patches existed, but nobody had installed them. So almost by definition, if you get hacked, it's proof that you did not do the basics of patching the known vulnerabilities. Consequently, vulnerabilities or the hacks are very easily executed. Most of them get in a minute or less. They could easily have been prevented by dedicating enough resources to patching everything. And it's not necessarily simple to patch everything. I mean, maintaining one computer is trivial. Maintaining 1,000, it's hard. Also, almost all hacks are discovered by a third party. Someone who goes, that's funny, how come I see your data on this server? And it takes generally months to discover that something has been patched. But that is it in a nutshell. And my argument is that while 0 days are frightening, you really have to consider how do you do the basics so that the fundamental vulnerabilities are covered. Because hacking, to my mind, is much more about vulnerabilities than hackers. There will always be hackers, there will always be thieves. I manage the thieving problem by locking my door, closing the windows, doing all that basics, and you need to do the same thing with your networks. In terms of terms that you see frequently on the internet, the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat, is quite common. It generally refers to nation states such as China, though China fervently denies this. They're not terribly sophisticated, but they're good enough. And that's the key. It's not about sophistication, it's about being good enough. In many cases, they get in and they start poking around. I believe it's quite likely that there are people who use the same tools and are freelancing. They're looking for stuff they might be able to sell later, and that might explain a lot of commercial hacking. But there's no telling who does what. It all looks the same, and attribution is really hard to do. The vast majority of intrusions you see depend on spear phishing. Emails sent to a person appearing to come from somebody they trust. It could be a colleague, it could be a friend, it could be the bank, as you see here on the slide. But they expect you to click on a link. That might be, see the pay raises for everybody here, or look at how much leave you have left, or look at these negotiations. Frequently, they're designed to appeal to something that likely to be of interest to the target. So if you're targeting diplomats, it'll be something about international negotiations. If you're targeting individuals, it might be from a bank. This is a lovely little cartoon. Generally, if you send out 10 phishing emails, one